Hello and welcome to the Inside Intelligence webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on Pearl Harbor, Japanese espionage, and the strange case of Frederick Rutland with Ron Drabkin. My name is Natalie Cross and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Intelligence Analysis playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Michael Ard, Program Director for the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Today, we're very excited to have with us author Ron Drabkin, who will discuss these very interesting and intriguing events prior to World War II with Japanese espionage in the US and the strange case, as we said, of British aviator and spy Frederick Rutland. And this is all told in his latest book, Beverly Hills Spy. So, Ron, I think you have some slides for us, and I'll let you take it away.
Sure do. Here we go. Okay, turn this on, slideshow. You're seeing me okay, I assume?
Looks great.
Hi, my name's Ronald Drabkin, and I've written this book called Beverly Hills Spy, and I'm going to talk about Pearl Harbor and Japanese espionage today. A little bit of a personal introduction. I'm actually a businessman myself, Silicon Valley kind of thing. My obsession with this whole topic came up. My father was in counterintelligence. It was under the Department of the Army at the time, and as was my grandfather way back when. And that kind of got me on this quest to figure out what had actually happened before Pearl Harbor with the Japanese agents and such. So I got onto this quest, partly with the family stories, but actually, after my father had passed away, and it's about 6 years ago, I had filed some FOIA requests to figure out what had happened and what he had been working on. I never did find out, but I got back the fairly newly declassified file on Frederick Rutland and just got absolutely fascinated by some of the crazy revelations that were in this newly declassified file. In addition to that, the British at Q, they've declassified his file as well, which is a monster, over 1,000 pages. They were following him for a very long time. And I live in Japan, and we found a bunch of Japanese memoirs that also tell the story from the Japanese point of view, which obviously is very relevant. And then the other thing that's new and exciting these days is a lot of newspaper articles from the time are now online and searchable. In the old days, you had to go to microfilm, but now they're all there, and that put that all together and it told the story. So talking about Pearl Harbor, this is a lengthy discussion we're not getting into here, but the question was whose fault it was. Even immediately after the attack itself, whose fault. And there's unending books and research papers about the intelligence failures or whose fault it was or who the FBI should have listened to. It's really an ongoing, never-ending story here, which hopefully I can shed a little bit of new light on. So let's talk about this fellow, Frederick Rutland. He was the son of a working man, the son of a day laborer in the south of England. He'd grown up over by a Royal Navy base and watching the ships, and he was one of those fellows that always wanted to join the Navy. As an undernourished 14-year-old, he dropped out of school, lied about his age, and joined the Royal Navy, which was not, you didn't typically become an officer or, an upper rank fellow from that kind of background, but he's a very intelligent, very motivated, very, just a overall excellent fellow who really mastered every part of the ship. And he passed the test to become an officer, which was, in particular, the written test was, for a middle school dropout was in theory fairly impossible, but he did it. He became an officer and then a pilot. and became, well, probably the most important pilot in the Royal Navy in World War I. Among his many feats was the Battle of Jutland was the largest surface combat battle of World War I and potentially everywhere. And this battle had 99 on one side, 99 German ships. On the British side, you had 149 ships and one airplane flown by this fellow Rutland, who took off, flew over the German fleet, radioed back where they were, flew back, and that was history, right? That was the first time there'd been a combat mission from a ship. And throughout the later years of World War I, he had many other significant innovations, was very close to the top admirals of the Royal Navy who would go to him directly for advice on how to use their new planes, and was more of a tactician than an engineer, than a pilot, really. So he was pioneering landing the ships, on the ships, taking off from turrets, and overseeing the construction of the new aircraft carriers. And he possessed very unique and invaluable knowledge. The British created the Royal Air Force. They took the Royal Naval Air Force, Naval Service, and then the Royal Flying Corps and merged them in the Royal Air Force. And in this post-war Royal Air Force, he was not promoted. There was some politics. He was a good 10 years older than the other pilots because he had come out of the ranks and worked his way up. He was lower class, and they told him, look, with your background, you're just not going to go far compared to the top academy grads. And they were really not impressed how he was swapping wives with his other fellow officers, which was not done back then. And one day, what he did is he was frustrated that his talents were not being recognized, and he went to the Japanese Navy, the office. They had an office in Westminster in London, and offered his services, and they were very, very happy to accept them. So the Japanese Navy hired him as an advisor to start, and it was a subterfuge, not a very deep one, but they basically told the British he was going to be working for Mitsubishi. That was not the case. He was employed directly by the Japanese Navy. He lived in this small town with the other some of the top admirals, and helped them redesign their new planes, their new ships, sorry, the Akagi and Kaga, the lead ships on the Pearl Harbor attack, and really helped them learn how to land on a ship, and significantly became a confidant of these top Japanese naval officers. I'm sorry, the young and bright Japanese naval officers who later became the top admirals around the time of World War II. The Japanese, after some time, they sent him to Hollywood, which is a little unexpected, but they needed an agent in Los Angeles, where the Americans had all the technology that they wanted to steal, all the aircraft manufacturers. Basically, everyone but Boeing was in Los Angeles at the time. And he had a very clever way of stealing information. You can see by the newspaper article here. He was a British fellow. He was the head of all these parties, and he'd invite Charlie Chaplin and Boris Karloff and some other friends, and invite the top executives from Lockheed and Douglas, as well as the some admirals from the U.S. Navy. And in this area, getting guys drunk, the last thing they suspected was he was a Japanese spy, and he got a lot of great information from them there. Another thing in the FBI files was infiltration of Lockheed. He sent in a night janitor to steal the information, and night janitor is a great person to have on your side if you're trying to steal information. Interestingly, the MI5 and MI6 have been following this fellow for a long time. They were intercepting all of the Japanese radio communication between the UK embassy and Japan, and there's a couple of very hilarious memos where the British and Americans were not talking about Japan at all at the time in the 30s. Not just about his case, but nothing about Japan at all. And the reason was in this memo I've got pasted up here, the head of MI6 is being told by his fellows, we want to work with the Americans, but this guy Rutland, our famous war hero, has been a spy in the US for 6 years. We've known all about it. We haven't said a word, and this is very awkward. So, yeah, it's happened. There's other episodes where he goes to Japan with his daughter in 1939, and he gets a new mission, which he and his daughter stop by Honolulu on the way back to the U.S. And his daughter is spending a good week plus sunbathing, and he is spending a good week plus scouting out the Pearl Harbor itself. The FBI wakes up at some point. It appears that they were mostly told by the British actors. Boris Karloff shows up quite a bit, as well as another big actor of the time named Alan Mowbray. They had originally thought that they knew he was suspicious. They thought he was a British agent for quite a while, as you might think. But what happens is what's revealed in the new FBI files is that he had actually become a double agent working for U.S. Naval Intelligence under a fellow named Elias Zacharias. And you can see this memo here that was also declassified, where the Navy is telling the FBI, back off this guy, he's our guy. They have all these different plans where he's planning on, if there's be a war between Japan and the US, he was going to save his skin by becoming a US agent working for the Navy. However, the Navy intelligence and the FBI were not getting along at all here. And we've got a list of things here. The Navy was concerned with Japan as being a threat, far back, 20 years before. The FBI was more East Coast focused on, Al Capone, all these other things. And the Navy, in their feeling that there's an existential threat to U.S. security, they're breaking a lot of laws. They're finding Japanese agents, they're breaking and entering. They're chasing wild stories, Japanese fishing boats, all these things. And the FBI is, very by the book and looking to control intelligence. So there's unending clashes here, including a personal one between Zacharias and Hoover. And towards the end of Rutland's story, he goes to, in July 1941, he makes a trip to DC trying to save his skin. And he basically goes to ONI and he says, look, the Japanese are going to attack. They always attack first. I know them well. I've known the people that type admirals, they're my buddies from 20 years ago. The ONI is not going to help him. They're just kind of discombobulated by a lot of things. He goes over to MI6, offers his services again. They don't like him because they know what he's been doing. And he also tries to get Japanese naval intelligence to hire him and put him into their intelligence place in Mexico. And he's become a hot commodity, and FBI and MI6 arrange to deport him, and that's what they do. And a couple months later, this is what happens. Okay. And without overselling it, his fingers were on really a lot of this attack. He had designed the carriers that were used in the attack. He had helped put the planes who carried on the attack both in business originally, as well as getting designs from Lockheed and such to help them with their long range ability, and had done on the ground scouting at Pearl Harbor itself. So yeah, and that is the end of the presentation. And I'll stop my sharing here.
Thank you, Ron. Let's just a couple questions. Everybody, if you'd like to put questions for Ron, you can use the Q&A function of the chat, and we'll get to them. One of the things, how did this end with Rutland? How did this story end?
It's a sad ending. He MI5 kept him in jail for as long as they could, because it was an embarrassment. And it got really nasty with him going after them personally and them going after him personally. And eventually he committed suicide. Or at least that's the story.
In about 1949, as I recall, from
Yeah.
just to frame it for everybody. Yeah. So there's and they put him in jail essentially when once the war broke out, right? It was
Right. Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked British ships and knock on the door. And it was they had suspended habeas corpus. So he was
right.
just put away.
Right. So that, and despite his record as a war hero, despite having the Distinguished Service Cross, whatnot, he was he couldn't pull any strings, and he stayed there till 43.
Yeah.
Which is and then which I found very interesting. He still tried to get do something in the war, but they wouldn't have it.
Yeah, he was he was a experienced small ship captain. He wanted to drive a small ship, and another had it gone differently, he could have been one of the guys on D-Day dropping the troops off at the beach. That's what he wanted.
Well, there's a lot of you touch on a lot of very interesting topics here. It's really a fascinating story about just even the beginning of that. Here he is, the first seaplane pilot to fly reconnaissance flight in a naval battle. He also was a hero because he saved a life, right? He was a real man of daring do.
Yeah.
One of the things let's go back to the British relationship with Japan, which a lot of people forget, which was fairly close for a while, correct? This right after the war.
Yeah. So Japan and Britain were allies for a good 50 years there, 40, 50 years. And so when he first went over to Japan, you could argue that the Japanese and the British were close enough that it wasn't as bad as it thought, as you might think.
And they were in fact looking to the relationship really didn't start to sour probably until later in the 20s or so. But it was
Yeah.
but it wouldn't have been unusual for someone of Rutland's expertise to engage with the Japanese on military issues. It was something that officially was being sanctioned, in fact, for a while.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's really a classic slippery slope.
Right. Let's talk about that slippery slope for a minute, because what's interesting about this story is his motivations.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a classic case of just doing it for money, or is there something more complicated than that here?
Yeah, with all disclaimers about not knowing exactly what's in the guy's head, he certainly liked the money. Absolutely. In this his house in Beverly Hills, I looked on Zillow. It currently goes for $14 million, right? But I think he liked also being in the game. So if you look back at like 1939, here he is. He's advising admirals of the U.S., British, and the Japanese Navy, which was probably unique, right? So he was like in the game, really enjoyed that kind of stuff and the technology.
Right, which of course was he had a lot of unique. One of the things about this character is here he comes along in really the dawn of the aviation age, but he's good at a lot of things, not just that, but he's also a skilled radio engineer. I mean, there's a lot of things one of the tragedies of the story is what he could have done legitimately would have been so helpful.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Going back to so his relationship with Japanese intelligence was always through the Imperial Japanese Navy, and they were his handlers.
Yep.
And they put him up in very high style in Hollywood. Let's talk a little bit about their expectations for this, and also maybe something a little bit more on what you consider their tradecraft at the time.
Yeah, okay. So their expectations, typically with any big organization, they have many different expectations. Certainly one was they wanted a sleeper, a not, a non-Japanese person who could be a sleeper who after the war started could get information and get it out to their operations in Mexico. So that was the original goal. But then they wanted more technology, and he's such a well-known pilot and engineer that after the Lockheed theft of information, they sent actually a Mitsubishi engineer to Los Angeles on a ship to meet with him, right? So they were going over the plane designs and a lot of details. So,
Um,
but I think, yeah, go ahead.
right, this would have been the P-38 Lightning
Yes,
that was being
which
developed at the time.
with the key point being the long range, which was so key to the battles in the Pacific. And their tradecraft it's kind of hilarious that there really was so little of it, or such poor tradecraft. Now, your viewers may know about the Japanese spy school in Nakano, which is there's been books written about that. That none of the Japanese Navy agents were allowed to go there because that was run by the Japanese Army, and the Japanese Army and the Navy were not getting along, right? So you get like the Japanese agents, one of them, well, how'd you prepare for this? He's like, well, I read Lawrence of Arabia. It's like, okay. uh, and if you and then so these agents were really top, really bright, top of the Japanese Naval Academy, but they weren't trained. And so the tradecraft was such that, they're driving around the US Navy bases in a car with their license plate registered at the Japanese embassy, right? Getting drunk and passing out with briefcases full of information. There's some really amateur stuff, mixed in with all the other stuff they were doing.
They had a network set up, and they were also using Mexico a lot as part of that. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, in World War One, Mexico was not friendly to the US. And the Japanese were under the mistaken assumption that would continue. So their plan was once the war started to run all the agents out of Mexico and send them into the US and get information out. In addition, Mexico City is a very high altitude. So if you're trying to intercept radio traffic, it's, the perfect place. So they put radio intercept devices up there, and they were able to manage, intercept actually the Atlantic radio traffic coming from Virginia for the first time, and that kind of thing.
And Tijuana.
And
There's also
Tijuana.
some cooperation there with local business people, correct?
Yeah, there's a couple files that have been approved for declassification, and I'm on the edge of my seat to get them.
Okay.
They've been approved for declassification, and that's been, I don't know, 3 years, so it's getting close.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah. It's only been 80 years, maybe we can see. But okay, so there's this amateurish network that they have. They're working, their Japanese and Navy officers are kind of learning as they go. And they're running Rutland, and they're paying them a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Right. Do you, given from what you divined from the sources, do you think they were getting their money's worth from Rutland and his network?
Well, we did the math, and we looked at Admiral Yamamoto's salary at the time, and Rutland's pay was 10x that. To give you an example of how much it was. So it was, I wouldn't say they are totally getting their money's worth, really. I don't know.
But yeah, he was able to be convincing enough, feed them enough to keep it going, at least for a while. And let's talk also about the relationship with, and I think it was MI5 at first, but they knew about Rutland's activities, but they had nothing to charge him with because he wasn't spying against the realm, correct?
Exactly. So they have about 1,000-page, file on him, and there's no proof of any breaking of British law. They have plenty of acts of information breaking U.S. law.
Right, but but they still weren't felt like they were in a position where they wanted to share this with the Americans, and particularly
Right.
with Hoover's FBI.
Yeah. Yeah. And vice versa. There's there's a couple hilarious MI6 documents. One of them is when they send him back to the UK, the FBI tells them that they have enough information to shoot him. And there's like a handwritten note on the file there saying we think this is a euphemism, but we're not
Right.
sure. Right? Maybe they really do. Right?
It wouldn't have been by the book,
Yeah.
but yeah, certainly it certainly conveyed something of their emotions on how much this guy was doing, and probably they're feeling that, I would think, that this guy's been doing this for 5 years. Now
Yeah.
we're finally on it.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that a little bit, because one of the things that I thought was fascinating was the relationship between Office of Naval Intelligence and the FBI, and some of the sort of stubborn figures, headstrong figures that were involved, including Ellis Zacharias. Can you speak a little bit about him?
Yeah, that guy was so he was the head of naval intelligence on the West Coast, a Japanese speaker. He had done his little program. One of the Navy guys had been sent over there in the late teens, and he was very, very alarmist about Japan. And according to the book by John Prados, Hoover had him thrown out of Hoover's office in the 20s for talking about Japan too much. And he was really banging the drum, and he was a little sensationalistic, and people just didn't believe him. I'm not quite sure what to take with all that, but he was right, but he was also, you can be right a lot, right? Like he was giving the alarm too much, I guess, early on.
And that was not well received by Hoover among other people.
Among other people, and people in the CNO office. Yeah, I mean, and he was a very what do you call it? Very talented, very popular with the sailors, but he was also very insubordinate. So he wrote so in the middle of 1945, the Washington Post put out an opinion piece written by him anonymously, saying, we should make sure that the Japanese keep their emperor, because that way they'll surrender. But at this point, he's a mid-level, he's a ship captain or a mid-level bureaucrat. He's not supposed to be putting articles in the Washington Post to try to influence U.S. government opinion, right?
Right. Eventually, he meets with Rutland.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what was agreed upon, or what do we think was agreed upon?
So my source for this is the FBI files, because I wasn't able to find the naval ones for the most part. But they have a lot of plans. The two of them are big dreamers. They're poor kids, disadvantaged naval guys, and like one of their schemes is to capture a Japanese submarine. So they come up with the plan where they tell the Japanese that as soon as the war starts, give me like a week or two, send a submarine out to the coast in Malibu, and then Rutland will be able to signal them and stuff like that. And that way, the Navy destroyer can go in and grab the Japanese submarine and get their code books. Like this is their plan, and they convey it to the Japanese who are not having it. But these are the kind of things they're working on together.
But it was enough. But this connection between Zacharias and Rutland was enough to convince the FBI to back off, essentially. If
At least for a good year or
I'm
so.
interpreting
Yeah.
it correctly, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For a good year or so.
Right. What was the thing that eventually caused the FBI to really get on this case?
They broke up a Japanese spy ring in the middle of 1941 that had just an unbelievable amount of information that they'd the plans for the B-29. They were plans to get African Americans to try to go on strike in the shipyards. I mean, they had maps of every oil refinery on the West Coast and like how to destroy it. I mean, it was some sensitive stuff and a bunch of information from Rutland in the files of the Japanese guy that had all this information. And so that was enough for the FBI. They're like, look, Navy, you say this is your boy, but we're not having it.
Right. And they're also, you mentioned in the slideshow, and it comes up in the book, because this is one of the, frankly, the charms of the story is that all these fascinating characters, all these celebrities from that era that are appear in the book, including the British actors who were living out in Hollywood at the time, like Mowbray and Boris Karloff. But you think they were also tipped off the FBI that there's something about Rutland that was suspicious?
Yeah, and they were tipping them off, and they were also heavily involved in the investigation. Personally, so that it's kind of fascinating, right?
Right. So even Charlie Chaplin's former manservant turns up in the story, which is really interesting. That a Japanese American, was he, or just
He
Japanese?
was Japanese. Yeah. It was the backstory on Chaplin here is that he had like an all Japanese house crew. So his butler, the maids, the servants, the drivers were all, all of them Japanese. And he said it was because they're much better employees. He says, he said that the Japanese will get the broom into every corner and do a good sweeping, and the Americans are kind of lazy. They'll just sort of do a little moving the dust around, which actually I believe is probably true. But the real reason he had the Japanese staff there is they didn't speak English, and all these paparazzi were going after him and trying to get stories on him, right? And they would keep his secrets, right?
But yeah, they probably could have used more of them as in their spy network, who would maybe have the attention to detail that would have prevented a lot of problems for them.
Absolutely.
Right. So anyway, this gentleman Kono ends up getting enmeshed somehow with the real spy network that was going on. This is how this ties into the story, correct?
Yeah, so he was working for Chaplin for about 20 years, but when Chaplin's third wife came into the picture, they didn't get along, and he got let go. And he tried writing a expose about Chaplin that didn't go over well, and then finally he got involved with the spy ring, obviously to try to make some money.
Which is a theme that goes through the book. A lot of it is the sort of the greed element here, which puts blinkers on, especially characters like Rutland, who really didn't seem to have self-awareness to realize what trouble he was going to get himself into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to our questions from the audience, and please you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. Christopher asked, what is it? So we touched on this, I think, the documentation for Rutland's warning to the ONI, and you say that all pretty much comes from the FBI file, correct?
It's the FBI file as well as he's in the files in Q. Yeah.
Right. And one of the things I'd like to ask about, and there's another question we have, which we talked about a little bit on the counterintelligence before Pearl Harbor. It pays to, I think, keep in mind here that in some ways these are the FBI is a fairly new organization, and it hadn't really it was just cutting its teeth on this in the 30s, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the ONI, however, had been around for a while, and it struck me from reading the book that I expected a little bit more professionalism in their handling of things. What can you tell us about their or the conclusions you can draw about their approach to counterintelligence at the time?
It was a confused organization at the time. They were people who were very patriotic, and they saw the threat and they want to do something about it. So, they've got that. But they were breaking laws left and right, making the FBI unhappy. And it's kind of nutty that there were 4 ONI directors in the year 1941. So the agency was really kind of in chaos.
Mhm.
Chaos is a little too strong a word, but you know,
O and
you're
I directors, yeah,
yeah,
right.
4 directors like, and the fourth director came in like I think 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor. So it was their goal, it was their job to protect the US, but they were just cycling through directors. They had problems with the political battles with not just the FBI, but more like the rest of the Navy.
It just wasn't a prestige job for them.
It was not a prestige job. And yeah, it was not a prestige job. That wasn't where you went if you wanted to become a top admiral.
Right, right. And that was interesting that you saw that with Zacharias a bit, was a lot in some weird, I think it's interesting in the book, they're almost a little bit parallel, these characters. Not that Zacharias was a traitor, obviously he wasn't, but is brilliant, yet somehow not always that self-aware, kind of like Rutland.
Exactly.
And yeah, and not really very politic, didn't really understand how to convey an important message.
Yeah, extremely talented, got there on the you know, on their skill, but yeah, not self-aware.
Okay, there's another question from Barbara about the basic problem that now going back to our aviation industry, which was largely centered out in the LA area.
Yeah.
What did they do to protect their secrets back in those days?
Um, the head of, I mean, the Lockheed hired a guy from FBI to be their head of security. So that, you know, that's something. They're working pretty closely with the FBI. You know, it's one of the things that's recently been declassified was a lot of there was a lot of discussion about the Japanese having workers in the plants. And, you know, we found the documentation showing that not to be true. That was just some kind of hysteria thing. So they seem pretty they seemed reasonably on it, it seemed.
Somewhat alert to it. That but they didn't did Lockheed suspect that they may have had some, did they suspect Rutland's plant?
Yeah, they did. They're like, this guy's just yeah, they're like this, yeah, that why is this guy commuting 45 minutes and he used to work for Boris Karloff, and why does he want this job, and why does he want to be at night? And so they stuck him in the cafeteria, and he got all mad about it. He's like, no, I want to be back inside the plant. And they're like, that's strange. Yeah.
Right. So for a janitor's job, he's willing to, and he's also complaining about where he's being
Yeah.
being positioned. So
And like, why was Rutland pushing for us to hire this guy? Why did he even care? You know, it's all in the, yeah, like there.
right. So more about it, which gets to another question, which we've touched on with respect to Japanese intelligence. But what about Rutland himself? What about his tradecraft? How do you evaluate it?
Well, he was a very smart guy, and he definitely he definitely pushed the limit one too many times. You know, like it just a little too I don't know if you call it arrogance, but he was really, really, really good at coming up with credible deniability. You know, no one ever really got him on anything, right? Because he always had a story. Oh, I'm going to Japan. Well, I'm a you know, sell them some aircraft. Oh, I'm you know, I've got a patent over there. You know, it was always a good story.
In the import business or
Import business.
yeah.
Yeah,
I have business interests in Mexico. I go across the border.
yeah, that's exactly what he did. He invested in a bottling plant in south of Tijuana. Yeah,
Right.
check my investment. Yeah.
Another question, Bill asked, did anything on Pan American show up in your research? For example, with all the Pan American flights that were going in the region, including even out to Midway. Is that something that anything like that turn up in your research? Was there any interest in that on the part of the Japanese?
Not really, no. The American shipping companies show up a lot, like Matson and those. Like they were helping ONI like check out the Japanese ports, but I didn't get much on Pan Am. Some
Okay,
passenger.
so
Yeah.
yeah, it's something that might be the second book. You know, the follow-on is I don't know,
Yeah.
but What about some questions Walker asked about the what do you see as some of what were your experience with the FOIA requests when you were doing your research?
You can't say enough good things about the people at the National Archives. They're super helpful. I was doing research during the Corona time, so they kept getting kicked out, but you know, that's not their that wasn't on them. Yeah. And I know they're being pushed by other people, like they have to figure out people's pensions and stuff. So they didn't have to give me that much time a day.
That's great. What about it seems like you were more successful on the FBI side of the story than with ONI.
Yeah, the FBI declassified, they redacted a lot. And you know, in the FBI files that are declassified, they do explain the quote unquote cover up. You know, they're like, don't talk about this guy Rutland working, you know. It would have been really embarrassing if someone from the Navy pointed the FBI and said, look, we had a guy here who was trying to warn us and you stopped us, Mr. FBI, right? And so there's a, you know, Hoover memo saying, don't talk about this guy to anyone. I don't care if it's true, right? And there's a few Navy memos out there about like, so what did we promise him? You know, because they had gone through 4 directors, right? And so like the 4th director is like, what what are we promising this guy and what are we doing? And I couldn't find the answer.
Right. So they never really, there's no proof, at least we don't know, if there was actually a formal relationship with Rutland. Is that correct? From the point of view of ONI.
Well, there's the FBI taking requests from Zacharias to lay off him, saying they say he's our agent, and the FBI is like, okay, he's your agent. Well, we'll back off. But the actual arrangement itself is not documented.
It's not documented, right? This is about one of our listeners asked about and I'm going to ask this person, would you give some context to this question about Frank Capra? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're looking at there? I'm not sure what the context is to ask that question for Ron. The book doesn't explain it doesn't mention any Hollywood directors that are involved in the story, correct?
Frank Capra is not in the book.
Yeah, so yeah, let us know if you have some idea behind that, just let us know, follow up. You know, one of the things I was thinking about in going through the book is how really modern this problem is. You know, that I mean that here we have, you know, we have foreign governments focused on stealing technology from our major aerospace industry still going on today. What is there any lessons we can draw from that? I'm following up on Walker's question here.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strikingly parallel today. It's, you know, California high-tech companies, it's startups, it's investors, and it's foreign governments trying to get the information. So strikingly, you know, analogous to you know, to try to draw a bigger point, you know, it's like, you know, yes, this is happening today. And by the way, back then it didn't make sense to have a war and it happened anyway. So that's the other kind of cautionary tale, I think, you know, like the Japanese didn't want that, you know, it wasn't in their interest to start a war, but they did it anyway. That could happen again, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that got let's and folks, yeah, we'll be here. We have a few more minutes if you want to ask some more questions, but getting back to the Pearl Harbor issue, right? There's is Rutland frankly in a panic to try to prove his worth in mid 1941 is attempting to protect himself, to offer information. Would he, based on what you can surmise from the story, would he have any special insight on what the Japanese plans were, especially in terms of attacking Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, well, let me tell you what he told the interrogators. And so take that with a grain of salt, right? That he was
Right.
trying to stay out of jail, right? He said, look, I know the Japanese Navy better than any foreigner. I've been working with these guys for 20 years. I've been working with the top admirals, you know, Yamamoto, Shimada, for 20 years. They trust me. I trust them. If you put me in the spy headquarters in Mexico there, I won't know the details of the attack, but I will know that something's about to happen. And I'll tell you, which sounds reasonable to me.
Right, but they didn't, at this point, nobody was willing to take him up on that.
No, no.
And whether that would have made a difference, of course, is an open question.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of people who quote unquote warned the FBI. I would say he is more credible than, you know, the you look at the other stories about a chef in an
Right.
embassy in South America, you know, a Yugoslavian triple agent who's never been to Japan. You know, like if you he does know these guys very well. He knows how they work, right?
Right, so there was some, there at least there was some access that you could point to where, but of course, you know, this is something that we talked about in intelligence studies and the literature all the time. And Pearl Harbor is, as much as we know about it, there's still diametrically opposed schools of thought on who's to blame, whether there was enough information, whether there was too much information. You know, you can pick your favorite author on that.
Yeah, I think you know, I think the key thing that a lot of you know, a lot of authors will miss is that just because someone was warned doesn't mean they were credible and doesn't mean there weren't 100 other warnings. And I think people who work in intelligence know that very well, but that's not maybe understood more broadly out there.
Right.
They called it, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's what, yeah, I was like, I was even in, you know, following up, and I was just, trying to learn more about Zacharias, and he even has stories about warning husband Kimmel, admiral in, at the Pac Fleet there in Pearl Harbor. Whether true or not, I don't know. But it seemed like everybody after the fact had great clarity on what was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that he probably did, but then he also he put the Pacific Fleet on alert a year earlier because he was sure that Japanese suicide planes based in Baja California were about to do
Right,
suicide
this was
into
Zacharias,
San
yeah.
Diego. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's one of his how many times he warned people.
Right, right. That was, you know, a classic problem with warning right there.
I've asked a couple of the Japanese intelligence folks I work with, you know, it's like, what do you think about these reports that the American, Office of Naval Intelligence said they were Japanese bombers hiding in the desert of, you know, Baja California. They thought that was the most hilarious thing they'd ever heard, right? I'd be like, of course not.
You know, it does though, it does make one a little bit more, at least aware of the very draconian decisions that were made to intern Japanese Americans, right, when the war started, that there were all these rumors and in fact, there were some actual networks of spies going on, and you can sort of see what the basis for the overreaction was.
Yeah, I heard that a lot from my family members. The Japanese farmers on the two sides of the runway of the Douglas aircraft
Right.
factory. You know, I don't believe nothing shows that they were doing any espionage, but that was just not a good place to be, right? It was just it drew suspicion.
Right.
For bad luck.
Right. Well, listen, Ron, thank you very much for being with us today to talk about your fascinating book and your you know, the journey that you took to put this together.
Thank you, Michael.
And I think this really sheds a very interesting light on a still very fascinating period in espionage history. And I hope you don't stop here. You know, we'll look forward to your next opus on intelligence and the Japanese connection.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah, why not?
Right.
Yeah,
That's
why
right.
not?
Why
There's
not?
so much more out there, right?
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. There's always more stories to be told. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us today, Inside Intelligence. This will be our last program for 2024. We look forward to offering a whole new slate of programs for you in 2025. We're working on getting some issues on the state of terrorism. Probably it's a South Korea and North Korea program coming up in the next few months as well. So please stay tuned and keep an eye out for those announcements.